Welcome everybody to this year's annual LESZEK KOŁAKOWSKI lecture, commemorating this great man who you can see here, probably the greatest Polish scholar to have been our colleague at Oxford. Poland has, as you know, been a pioneer in the end of communism in the 1980s, a pioneer in the transition to democracy and the rule of law in the 1990s, along with another leading country, Hungary, and then unfortunately was a pioneer in the attempt to demolish democracy and the rule of law under the populist governments of Law and Justice, very much following the Hungarian example. And now it has another first, in that it is a pioneer in attempting to undo a peculiar kind of state capture, which was an attempted state capture by populists in the conditions of a full EU member state, because the attempted demolition of democracy and rule of law was done while keeping the facade of and attempting to comply with a rather strong set of EU standards. So this is a particularly interesting subject for this year's KOŁAKOWSKI lecture, and we're particularly glad to have Professor Marek to address it. Professor Safjan started as one of us, an academic. He did his studies at the University of Warsaw, was a professor there, held the position of the director of the Civil Law Institute, vice rector of the university until 1997. He's also an honorary doctor of the EUI in Florence, but particularly relevant to this subject, he was first a judge on the Constitutional Court in Poland, then the president of the Constitutional Court from 1998 to 2006, and then from 2009 until the end of January this year, a judge on the European Court of Justice. So he has seen this story at first hand, both from inside the Polish side, as the president of the Constitutional Court, and as a judge on the ECJ. So he has a truly unique perspective in which to talk about, and hence I think his title, Restoring the Rule of Law in Poland, a particular or a universal challenge. Please join me in welcoming this year's KOŁAKOWSKI lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to deliver a lecture to such distinguished audience. It is both pleasure and honor for me. Really, I must confess that over the past few years, I had unique and in some kind privileged point of serving not only the development in Poland, but also those within the European Union, particularly as Europe responds to the dramatic crisis of the rule of law in Poland. As both an observer and participant in this event, and now having concluded my mission at Luxembourg Tribunal, I naturally became involved in the process of restoring democracy and the rule of law. Some may argue that this involves a bit of role mixing, as participant observation can compromise the necessary distance and maintains of proper perspective. Of course, excuse me, perhaps, for sometimes emotional and subjective opinion presented in my lecture. I can exclude it. However, on the other hand, this unique position has also enabled me to perceive certain issues with greater accuracy and precision. I will begin my lectures with some remarks on the transformation process post 1989, followed by the period after 2015, when the Law and Justice Party, PIS, assumed power, concurrently illustrating the European challenges and the significance of this event for shaping the future European perspective. Finally, I will present my observation on the ongoing process of restoring the rule of law in Poland. What distinguishes Polish history in the last few decades? It is undeniable uniqueness during this period. Poland initially astonished the world with extraordinary solidarity movement and creation of something seemingly impossible, an effective mass civil protest against authoritarian rule. Secondly, Poland managed to emerge from the grip of totalitarianism as the first communist state through a process known, as Bronisław Geremek put it, a peaceful revolution. Round table talks and extensive civic debate, though still in the shadow of the Soviet army stationed in Poland at the time, ultimately leading to the formation of the foundation of new political system. Symbolic first free elections on June 4, 1989, after years of communist oppression, are difficult to compare with anything in European history. Thirdly, from a country plagued by inefficient economy, poverty, and technological backwardness, Poland became a leader in successful, profound process of transformation towards democratic rule, becoming a full-fledged member of Western structure, the European Union and NATO. There was a radical change in all possible parameters: economic development, quality of life, political changes, social mentality. And this process of rapid ascent toward a clearly defined goal with visible and extremely positive result was suddenly interrupted by a dramatic event that aimed to completely reverse the direction of ongoing process, slamming to the door shut on Europe and consequently leading to the deformation of what seems to be firmly ingrained in the nature of the Polish democracy. The idea of rule of law, along with independent judiciary, effective defense of fundamental rights by strong constitutional court, free media and respect for minority rights, was called into the question. The anatomy of the collapse was almost impossible to explain in a country that was on the path of success and development, and to society, overwhelmingly, about 80% supported belonging to Western structure. Yet it happened, creating another time, another this time negative European phenomenon. What did it happen? You may be surprised if I formulate the thesis that the source of what happened in 2015, when nationalist and far-right formation won the elections, lies to significant extent in the divergence of consciences, expectations, and preferences, the quality of life of the elites, or more broadly, the upper middle class on one hand, and the rest of society on the other hand. This better educated and more engaged part of society has been in a state of real self-satisfaction with achievements which were remarkable. That is true. But with benefits very unevenly distributed in our society. There is nothing more painful than radical inequality of position and opportunities, especially when the starting point is universal, as it was in communism. Egalitarianism, even if it was primary egalitarianism of scarcity, and paradoxically equality in the absence of chances. The standard of living was raised, but unequal, and these inequalities were pronounced. Moreover, many could not keep up with the new reality, and one can say that and fell into marginalization. But the real problem was the elites, including the legal elites, arrogant, often doctrinaire in their analysis of reality, failing to see the need for communication with those who didn't find themselves in this new condition, and with those on the other side of the barricade, often former colleagues from Solidarity, thinking differently about the transformation process. Lawyers didn't see inefficiency of courts and procedures, the decorative nature of some important principles and values which sounded beautiful but remained dead letters. There were, of course, incomparably more successes and positives of transformation than negatives. But what failed contained a strong enough seed for the spread of demagogy and populism, and this happened especially when a skillful, sufficiently determined politician, frustrated by the previous failures, emerges. And such a politician waiting for the historical comeback did indeed appear, Jarosław Kaczyński, the leader of Law and Justice. The stage of the so-called good change began, but in reality, it was the dismantling of the democratic rule of law. What was determining factor in understanding the Polish reality in 2015? The formation of new political constellation in Poland meant the interruption of the continuity of democratic processes from the very beginning and aimed at the formation of authoritarian system. It was a planned process, not a random deviation from changes distorting democratic institutions. What happened wasn't an ordinary changing of the guards in any democratic system, such as the assumption of power by the opposition party, but the establishment of the rule of anti-system party, not respecting the democratic mechanism associated with the concept of liberal rule of law. The qualification of such system by its main ideologue, Viktor Orban, as illiberal democracy contains a significant part of the truth. In my opinion, however, this term remains primarily an oxymoron. Regime rejecting liberalism ceases to be a democracy. Initially, only a certain relatively small part of society was aware of the nature of the new power and its intentions. This became quite clear after the first month, perhaps even weeks, of the rule of the new parliamentary majority. Its motto, directly declared by the prominent politician of PIS, Mr. Kornel Morawiecki, the father of Prime Minister Morawiecki, was a thesis formulated in the saying which was supposed to justify the blatant violation of the Polish constitution. I quote, "Justice is above the law, and justice is what results from the will of the people. And since the people have opted for our political formation, we must act in accordance with the will of the people. In the other words, the will of the ruling majority became per se the only guideline to follow from that moment. The new power openly spoke the language of Carl Schmitt, the 1930s, from the 1930s. I will return to the issue of language later in my language. The seizure of power by PIS didn't solely rely on adhering to the motto the winning majority takes all, which is a phenomenon often encountered even in countries as United Kingdom with strong democratic foundations. The philosophy of the ruling majority went much further and aimed to deform the very nature of the mechanisms constituting important component and guarantee of our democratic system. The result of the captures of the Constitutional Tribunal was to become the guarantor of the government's actions and legitimize its openly unconstitutional laws. The court were supposed to safeguard the interests of public power rather than the right and freedom of individuals. Judges who thought differently about their mission were labeled as enemies of the state and the society, forming a caste. The fight against caste judges and independent judiciary became the dominant narrative in PIS political discourse, which consequently encompassed all segments the judiciary and all areas of the public power. Public media lost their independence under the guise of restoring truth in public life. Central bank and monetary policy council, instead of safeguarding political independence and sovereignty in decision regarding interest rates and or money issuance, became mere executor of the government's will. The education system underwent the reform by drastically reducing any autonomous schools, had in shaping curricula and imposing a specific far-right nationalist historical narrative in the textbook. Even the brutality, it is very sad, but it should be said. Even the brutality and inhuman treatment of illegal refugees at the Polish-Belarusian border, the infamous pushback, are also credited to the majority in power. Examples of the emerging cancer called the good change gradually destroy all sensitive segments of democratic society. And there are, of course, many more. What was most astonishing for the legal world and the previous political elites? It seems that it was primarily the shock caused by the sudden exposure of the vulnerability of democratic mechanisms, considered until present to be strong guarantor of the constitutional system. It was a true decomposition of the myth formed by the concept admitted in the Article 2 of the Polish Constitution. Poland is democratic state, democratic rule of law, implementing the principle of social justice. One can say that but the power of populism is became greater, especially became stronger if it is accompanied by the frustration of significant part of society and relatively low legal and constitutional awareness. It was the case in Poland. The first fundamental lesson derived from these experiences can be assumed up in the state thesis that even the best designed institutions of democratic state will not defend themselves if they are not accompanied by the awareness of society, perceiving such institutions as its own guarantees of freedom. If the creation of new mechanisms of democratic state is primarily driven by the will of enlightened elites rather than social understanding of why these mechanisms are necessary and could constitute true safeguard of freedom, it is inevitable that sooner or later political formation will appear that will seek to subjugate them to its political interests. Such a situation always opens the door to manipulation and demagoguery. In the first phase of institutionalization process, it indeed merged some manifestation of opposition in defense of the Constitutional Tribunal took place, even in January 2016. However, for the majority of society, the dispute over illegal judicial appointment in the Constitutional Tribunal remained a conflict of elites at the time. Three events radically changed the picture. Firstly, the symbolic act of self-immolation in front of the Palace of Culture in Warsaw by Piotr Paweł Szczęsny on October 27, as desperate expression of protest against the destruction of the rule of law. Piotr Szczęsny left a manifesto containing precisely defined demands for return to the path of democracy. This act deeply ingrained itself in the public memory, serving as reference point for subsequent mass protests of society. Secondly, social massive multi-thousand, with participation really of hundreds of thousands of people, demonstration also nighttime with candles illuminating the courthouse building in defense of the courts and above all the Supreme Court, which as a result of the so-called reform, or rather anti-reforms, was to lose its complete independence from political authority. In this protest, in defense of the courts, the special place was occupied by the march of 1,000 judicial robes, which gathered representatives of almost all legal professions, judges and lawyers, and from all over Europe in Warsaw on January 12, 2020, and which will surely be permanently inscribed in the history of Poland, but also in European history. Thirdly, the abortion ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal, which had already became non-court, completely banning de facto abortion, so the life of mothers, incest, rape. Never before in Poland have such massive million-strong social protests, marches of protesting women and men, taken place every day throughout the month. It was a moment of real civil awakening. From that moment, it became clear to the majority that it was no longer a dispute among elites, but about seizing freedom. Values and principles descend to the ground. Constitutional awareness awakening. The awakened civil society and universally achieved constitutional awareness, allowing to appreciate the importance of the institutions of the rule of law, was perhaps the most important added values of this period. The image of Trump numbering the thousands in front of the Supreme Court in Warsaw, holding candles and carrying banners proclaiming, "Today we defend you, tomorrow you will defend us. This is our cause," will forever remain at etched in memory. This exemplifies a profound understanding of the role of judiciary and the principle of separation of power, but also underscores that democracy and freedom cannot be effectively safeguarded without robust civil society. The second lesson from Polish experience containing universal message is the phenomenon of the attitude of Polish judges, their effective opposition to oppressive power. This phenomenon consists not only of the sharpness and scale of resistance, but also of the methods. In European history, there are very rare instances, to my knowledge, of such struggles of one segment of power against another. Here, an analogy comes to mind with the situation in Austria during the time of Chancellor Schuschnigg, 1938, when the Austrian Constitutional Court was destroyed. But in Poland, the resistance of judges, however, yielded results. It had not only a symbolic dimension. The message contained in this resistance boils down to the thesis that the courage and determination of people willing to pay a high price for defending the essence of their public mission can become an insurmountable obstacle to power with totalitarian tendencies. The majority of judges opposed the changes of so-called good change. The opposition took various forms and shapes. One of the most effective instruments was active and purposive interpretation of law, referred to the basic values of the Constitution, and as a result, dispersed application of the Constitution, which means de facto taking over by the courts the control of the constitutionality of law in place of the constitutional court taken by the political authority. The price of the resistance was sometimes high, increasingly disciplinary sanctions, suspension of the right to adjudicate, transfer to judicial sections dealing with matters distant from the previous judicial specialization, harassment with errant criminal proceeding, and also organized at the high level of ministerial power, mobbing against disobedient judges, disclosing gathered information about the private or even intimate life of judges. Such attitude was especially important in that situation, as Hans-Peter Graber, professor from Norway, said recently, we cannot expect the judges to protect us if we don't have the judges with ability to stand up to power. An important and universal lesson for Europe remains the activity of Polish judges who clearly understood that resistance against lawlessness is not only justified, but also constitutes a true duty. The mandate to oppose evil is not only the professional, but also moral obligation. It is in line with the message of Professor Marian Turski, former Auschwitz-Birkenau prisoner, do not be different. We should also remember the opinion Herbert Hart in this context, who said that a law can be too iniquitous to be applied, and that the judge may have a moral duty to discipline a law. What was at the time European perspective? In Europe at the beginning of the crisis in Poland, more than amazement, there was disbelief. Truth be told, description of the Polish reality since November 2015 deviated so radically from what Poland has been associated with in recent years that this narrative must have raised suspicion about their credibility. However, a change of the attitudes, including my colleagues in Luxembourg court, occurred as a result of the influx of preliminary questions from Polish judges to the CJEU. Two elements deserve attention here. Firstly, the skillful and imaginative use of the tools provided by the European treaties to national courts with the framework of so-called judicial cooperation. Polish judges used perfectly this instrument. Secondly, a clear and distinct response from the Court of Justice itself, which through innovative and, if not creative, purposive interpretation, found a way to assess the Polish crisis from the perspective of the most important general principle and values of EU law. A true breakthrough in the case of CJEU was the direct application of for the first time in case law, an important provision of the treaty in the European Union, Article 19 of the Treaty of EU, which assigns responsibility for the application of European law to the CJEU and national courts. It was from this text that clear threshold requirement for each national court in a member state were directly derived, without which it to comply, that court cannot be considered as the court indeed. In my opinion, the concept of the union of law understood in this way, covering the entire EU space, establishes a true federative principle of commitment. Today, this principle clearly defines the direction of processes aimed at restoring the rule of law in Poland, giving them a more universal significance. Throughout the entire history of the Union has encountered numerous crises, which ultimately culminated in the pursuit of sensible compromises and certain balance of the conflicting interests. Paradoxically, this crisis created an impetus for further strengthening integration. Contrary to previously known situation, it was swiftly understood this time that there wasn't a realm where compromise could be sought. Either the rule of law is fully respected or not at all, as there exists no scenario where the principle of the rule of law could be adhered to some extent, partially, or in certain areas only. Hence, finding appropriate tools to respond to the occurrences concerning the rule of law in a segment of the Union became an existential imperative for EU. Another fundamental step in response to the rule of law crisis aimed at strengthening the European Union as genuine union of law was the clear proclamation in case law of union, our constitutional identity as an autonomous legal order. Its essence lies in adhering to the same common principle and values, this one which are articulated in the Article 2 the Treaty of the European Union, refers to us genetic code of EU, notably, especially this concept is expressed in the ruling of the on the conditionality mechanism, date 16 February 2022. It was about the conditions necessary for use the so-called recovery funds after the COVID. This encapsulated a direct response to Poland and Hungary, which under the guise of defending their own concept of the rule of law, morality, anti-rule of law, consistently invoked their constitutional identity. The CJEU position in the conditionality mechanism ruling should also be seen as a step toward federalization of the Union. Thus, it's not only resolve a dispute between the European Council, European Commission, and Poland and Hungary, but also conveys a significant message to all member states. Sovereignty, as the CJEU articulated, cannot manifest in the arbitrary shaping the content and interpretation of the Union's fundamental principle upon which the entire EU legal system is based. The values expressed in Article 2, Treaty of European Union, sets an inviolable limit for all member states. But significantly and subtly, this was a clear move toward the constitutionalization of the Court of Justice of European Union. There was no doubt about the distinct constitutional moment. If we are to search for historical analogies, the dispute between the American Federal Supreme Court and the Supreme Courts of the individual states in the first half of the 19th century comes to mind. But then and now, the dispute revolved around the understanding and interpretation of constitutional severity. In both scenarios, the conflict sought to define the relationship between the highest judicial instances and to answer which court holds the final words. Of course, this dispute has been long-standing and has varied in its drama, but this time it concerned a key issue for the Union existence, the principle of the rule of law, creating, according to CJEU, a necessary and inalienable component of European identity. Without this principle, without this ruling, the Union would become defenders against the rising trends of anti-liberalism and authoritarianism in so-called electoral democracies, to use the term of Professor Laurent Pesch. As Kuhn Leonard, the president of ECJ, once observed following American judge from the 18th century, the Judge Hamilton, the judiciary did not have the sword of the executive, of the purse of legislature, possessing neither force nor will, but merely judgment. The Union does not have swords at its disposal for defense, but relies on the law, which is its most effective means of defense. Considering on the principle of the rule of law would be akin to hoisting a white flag. Therefore, I place the CJEU ruling of 16 February 2022 among the most important European judgments of recent years, alongside major decisions such as Van Gent and Loss, 1963, direct application of UN law, Costa versus NL of 15 June 1964 on the premise of the Union law, and Zimental of 9 March 1978. on the obligation to apply European law without the need to amend legislation. The ruling conditionality primarily confirmed for the future a unified concept of the rule of law in the European Union, which must be embedded in the context of the values expressed in Article 2, TEU, and interpreted together with those values, not in isolation. One of the most important experiences of this year of the battle against the authoritarian trends in the European Union is included in the message that that rise of judicial review based on the fundamental values and principles could strongly limit the scope of action for populist parties. It is perhaps important also to remember this message, especially now in the context in United Kingdom debate about the abandoning the European Convention of Human Rights. From the perspective of a long-term European integration strategy, the idea of European constitutional identity serves also as an extremely useful, multifunctional tool for taking effective action necessary to defend the Union's cohesion, its legal order, and the values of democratic society. The degree of interconnections among all EU segments is currently so significant that it is almost necessitates a methodological imperative to perform evaluations that consider the functional relationship between all components that constitute the integration mechanism. No one of them exists in isolation. The formation in democratic political process in any member state always leaves a deep mark on the European Union as a whole, striking at its cohesion and values. Where there is a need to protect the essence of integration mechanism, federal-like mechanisms must be activated, such as those I have previously indicated. This also hints at the future of the Union. The deepening of European integration, which I believe will inevitably occur, will also systematically lead to an expanded scale of using instruments with distinctly federal character. Now, how to restore democracy in Poland? The European Union has shown in recent years that it can be effective and it can significantly limit anti-democratic and authoritarian tendencies in a member states. The jurisprudence of the CJEU was undoubtedly both a source of inspiration and legitimacy for the resistant Polish civil society, especially for judges. Today, as I have mentioned, it constitutes one of the factors determining that return to the rule of law has become possible. The principle, otherwise general principle of the European system, the primacy of European law, allowed for the refusal to apply national norm in case of their inconsistency with EU law. It is in that context, it's necessary to emphasize that what created the legitimacy of the actions taken and gave strength and motivation for resistance, and today constitutes a premise for actions related to the reconstruction of the rule of law institution, stems from the support coming from European Union, which offered, above all, necessary toolkit for defense in the form of universally applicable principle of EU law. However, after 8 years of destroying institutions, transforming them from within, deforming democratic mechanism, ensuring checks and balances. The landscape after the battle encountered by the new democratic majority appears distressingly dramatic and affect the majority of public institutions and nearly all spheres of life. After years of practicing anti-philosophy, it's a time to restore the philosophy. But how to do it? What does it matter that the direction of necessary reforms required to restore the rule of law has been clearly defined? What does it matter that will of decisive majority of society manifest in the 2023 elections left no doubt about the democratic preferences of Poles if at the same time tools aimed at removing pathologies in the legal system were blocked. The legislative process necessary for radical change can be blocked on one hand by the presidential veto, whose rejection requires a qualified majority of 3/5 in parliament. On the other hand, by completely politicized and partially illegally constitutional tribunals. The ruling coalition, although it has a decisive majority in parliament, does not constitutional majority that would allow it to remove both of these obstacles. The situation is almost like in Shakespearean drama. There is no good exit. Every solution can become a trap. On one hand, not undertaking any actions and waiting for the end of the president's term, more than 1 year, and the judges of the Constitutional Court, several years, will discourage society, weaken the democratic determination of Poles, and fight in effectiveness of democratic procedure. On the other hand, restoring to methods not foreseen by law or contrary to existing law carries the risk of further destroying the rule of law and would have devastating consequences for the legal and constitutional awareness of citizens. As a result, one paradox follows another. How to defend the constitutional review of law from unconstitutional constitutional court? In other words, how to defend the constitutional court from itself? How to protect the independence and irremovability of judges by removing judges illegally appointed by the president? How to ensure the authority and credibility of the Supreme Court by questioning its current structure and shape to legal chambers in Supreme Court? Poland has become a real experimental laboratory for exploring how to restore democratic mechanisms in a minefield, as traps lurk everywhere. All the components necessary for reforms to restore the rule of law and not rule by law. Not only are they contained within the Constitution, but they have also been clearly defined in the judgment of the European Court. What remains is seemingly simple. Their implementation. Professor Wojciech Sadurski recently calls for an acceleration of reforms, reminding of the famous rule by Gustav Radbruch about the refusal to apply the lawlessness of laws over which stand supra-legal law, in our context, found in the Constitution and European law. The alternative is what Sadurski vividly describes as Sisyphean democracy. That is a laborious process of repairing the state, which cannot succeed in the face of obstacle created by the predecessor, invoking Radbruch seems appealing, but at the same time, it is an inoperative instrument in my view. Indeed, today, supra-legal law remains the constitution and common European principle expressing universal values, those to which Gustav Radbruch referred. Judges, of course, possesses the appropriate tools to appeal to this superior principle and values, often making difficult choices in case of conflict between the principle, for instance, between the principle of certainty, predictability of law, protection of vested rights on one hand, and the principle of protection of the right to fair trial before independent court. One can say that Dworkinian model of Judge Hercules is fully operational in such situations. However, why it's possible to at least partially block the application of illegal instrument by refusing to apply disciplinary procedure against judges or by refusing to respect verdicts issued by non-courts, according to CJEU rulings, such as the disciplinary chamber of Supreme Court, to carry out restructuring changes. Laws adopted by the Parliament are necessary. It is not possible to restore the structure of the Supreme Court by political decision of the government or Parliament resolution. It's not possible to verify so-called neo-judges repeating nomination procedure without a legislative procedure. Similarly, changing the shape of the National Council of Judiciary, an organ with unconstitutional composition, being source of this invalid appointment, requires a new law. Additionally, the number of improperly appointed judges operating in the system is huge, involving several thousand individuals affecting all levels of the judiciary. Question arises, can the Constitution, it is an important question, can the Constitution be broken to restore the constitutional order? And this is not just a clever rhetorical maneuver, but a genuinely emerging problem of the Polish democracy now. The dilemma of revolution or evolution seems unfortunately still relevant in the European Union after more than 70 years of its existence. We must avoid extremes, neither passive waiting for change in the political entourage, nor revolutionary radicalism is a good solution. There are certain analogies with 1989, with the landscape after the fall of the communism system, but also fundamental differences that must be recognized. After the fall of communism, it was not so much a process of restoring the institution of democratic rule of law, but process of constructing a new institution and solution previously non-existent. That is principles of check and balances, independence of judiciary, local self-government. Building a new structure of democratic rule of law is, in a sense, paradoxically, easier task as there are no obstacles arising from the existing status quo. The current situation is entirely different. The institution of democratic rule of law have been hollowed out from inside. Names and facades remain, but the institutions themselves have been affected by deep deformation, rendering their real functions and mission unfulfillable, mere semblance of what they were meant to be in democratic system. This occurred, for example, in the Constitutional Tribunal as a result of legal appointment or in the National Council of the judiciary, constructed according to principle contradictory to the Constitution. Institutions must remain because they are potentially necessary to ensure check and balances in rule of law, but they must also undergo through reconstruction. This is much more difficult than creating new institutions. It should be emphasized that the flawed institutions have already taken deep roots and produce many defective products. In the meantime, for instance, the thousands of flawed judicial nominations mentioned earlier. The difficulty is further compounded by the fairly widespread practice of language distortion by advocates of previous political formation, which reverse the meaning and changes the content of concept describing the reality of democratic state. Those who consistently violated the constitution now present themselves as defenders of the fundamental law. Those who practice the most brutal demagoguery in the government-dominated public media now demand respect for freedom of speech and the defense of democratic values. The phenomenon of language deformation and stripping concept describing reality of their proper meaning is well known and described in Victor Klemperer's book Lingua Tertii Imperii. Language manipulation serves to neutralize and relativize evil in public perception. But this phenomenon is accompanied by the specific narrative of so-called symmetries in Polish condition, proclaiming that faults lie on both sides, and difference only arises from the degree of the intensity of the evil done. Such narrative seriously distorts the social judgment of what happened and can lead to weakening the determination to defend democratic values, which is also essential elements of the atmosphere accompanying the process of restoring the rule of law in Poland. However, let's repeat, today in the European Union, in a state with modern democratic constitution, the return to the rule of law cannot rely on revolutionary change. Instead, we should speak, as Professor Geremek did in reference to the consequences of the so-called round table in Poland, of so-called peaceful revolution. Today is not about questioning the most important principle and values enshrined in the system, but about restoring them to their rightful place, bringing them back to life. And this is the real dilemma. Without breaking legal and systemic continuity, to breathe new spirit into the institution of the rule of law. Then and now, judicial independence defends itself precisely through adherence to the principle of rule of law and to the axiology of democratic rule of law, and the sense of belonging to the European community of states sharing the same values and principles played determining role in shaping attitude of civil society. Today, we are on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the EU expansion to include 10 new states, mainly from our part of Europe. All the more, or perhaps precisely for that reason, we must move within the framework defined by law, always remembering the premise of the Constitution, European norms, applying the Constitution. The judges, in particular, can make use of it directly applying the Constitution and European judgment, for example, by refusing to recognize the verdicts of illegally functioning constitutional framework, denying the right to adjudicate the chambers of the Supreme Court recognized as illegal in CJEU rulings. We cannot passively watch the further destruction of the rule of law. Sisyphean democracy cannot be accepted. Loyalty to the concept of radical changes doesn't, however, mean embarking on the path of revolution. An almost impossible task, but still, in my view, achievable. The process of restoring the rule of law will be slower and risk losing public support, but it must also proceed using all available methods gradually marginalizing undemocratic institutions and their products. Whether this will ultimately succeed remains an open question today. I believe that a positive answer is within our capabilities. It will be an important universal lesson for all of you. Thank you for.
Thank you very much for an extremely comprehensive, rich and thoughtful lecture. So many interesting points in there. The self-criticism of the elite, including the legal elite before 2015, which I think is exactly right. The emphasis on the social foundations of law, which recalls the work of our friend Martin Krieger, who's written very interestingly on this. The role of the judges, if I may say so, and this is in my words, personifying the traditional ethos of the Polish intelligentsia. In a way, that's what he was saying. Things that were new to me, the impact on the constitutional order of the EU itself. I think many of us will now go away and read this verdict of the 16th of February 2022, which I must admit I haven't read before. And of course, all the dilemmas of the restoration of the rule of law now. Before I go to questions, which I'm sure there will be many, can I consult the will of the people? Would people like a bit of fresh air? If this gentleman here, you'd like us to open that door a little bit, and I don't know, Alan, if you could just open that one. That will possibly create a bit of a drop.
Maybe a tough one.
Yes, fantastic. Just a little bit, that's perfect. Fantastic. Thanks very much. Thank you to the people. Now, questions, please. Who would like to kick off? Yes, please, if you could identify yourself.
Paulina is Professor of English Literature at Jesus College, Oxford. Thank you so much for your extremely illuminating and sharp lecture. I often found myself defending what is going on now against people accusing Poland, often say British or French journalists arguing that basically we are breaking the law in order to restore it. That's not quite what I wanted to ask about. You spoke about the relationship between the law and morality. You talk about the ethical dimension of it. And I have to admit that living abroad and watching what had gone on in Poland from afar, I was astounded, shocked, and disappointed by how many people supported and collaborated with that regime, how few moral and just people there were. And you talked about the 8 years of the rule of the so-called good change. But in fact, it was 4 and 4. There were elections in the middle, and the people chose to go on with it. And I'm just wondering how you might explain this, and thinking back to the previous year's KOłAKOWSKI lecture, when we heard about the role of the Polish Catholic Church, what role you see the church having played, given that they were effectively providing their imprimatur for what went on?
No, of course. Thank you for your question, Paulina. It is extremely interesting observation because of course we should firstly answer question why it happened. Why so great majority of Poles finally in democratic election gave their votes in favor of the PIS party, and twice, because it's true, 2015 and 2019. It is astonishing. It is really very hard to understand. I don't have the good precise answer In my view, the probably decisive factor was this clear divergences between the two parts of the society. The Polish intelligentsia, on one hand, very, very happy because of the transformation process, very successful generally. In effect, the result of this process, the great majority of the Polish intelligentsia received a lot of new opportunities for professional career, for material status, everything, which is decided for quality of life. But the rest of society, not necessarily, was beneficiary of such transformation process, not necessarily. Even their life became better, of course, because the quality of life was better than in the communist time, incomparably better. But as I said, this disappointment caused by the inequalities between the society was perhaps the dominant factor. On the other hand, one can say that it is also, of course, unfortunately, I should say also, the very, very fragile, very weak legal constitutional awareness of Poles. Unfortunately, Poles voted, it's true, voted for for Poland in the European Union, gave their acceptance for integration process and all crucial democratic reforms. But at the same time, the level of the constitutional awareness was extremely low. It is, of course, once again, one can say, our fault, our error. Also, my error also, because we don't understand that for building the strong democracy, strong institution, is absolutely necessary to have well understanding from the society and real support from society, which should be convinced that it is really necessary for the future. But it wasn't the case. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case. And the third element, you stress also the role of the Catholic Church. Of course, certainly, Catholic Church played essential role in this process, because not only because of this attachment to the, one can say, the most conservative values, but I get the impression that in Poland the Catholic Church has been included in the political game directly, and Catholic Church influenced strongly the political processes from the ordinary priest in the small villages, in small cities. Polish society is Catholic society. In 90s, probably about 80% of Poles attended the Sunday Mass. Now, perhaps the proportion are different, but it was at the time rather evident. And this element, of course, was one of the important factors. we should see it. Now, one can say that the situation is different. Now, it's different, especially after these experiences concerning the debate about the abortion law, strongly influenced by Catholic Church. Now the large part of the society, the young population, is rather outside of Catholic Church. And the last observation, of course, it is astonishing that the Poles voted for PIS twice, and 2015 and 2019. Why? After this experience, everything was clear. Because, in my view, it is the effect of the populism. Probably the greatest kind of populism in Europe at the time. It was effect of the one can say vandalization of the awareness by the public media, because the public media, completely dominated by the PIS, every day presented the content which was clearly against the democratic values of society. And it was important factors accompanied by this promise of the social privileges and this famous program in Poland, the 500 zloty, was of course one of the elements of the landscape.
Thank you very much. We've got a lot of questions from the floor, so I'm going to take them in twos. Ivan Kostev and then Adam Roberts.
Thank you very much for the great lecture. First one observation, in a certain way, when you start about restoring the rule of law, so the new government is facing what Mr. Kuczynski used to call legal impossibilism.
Yes.
And from this point of view, I do believe this is important because one of the problems that European Union is going to face is that in one country, populists are getting out of power, but in the other places, they're coming back. And then you're going to get the symmetry of the process in which the Slovak government is going to say, we're doing with the public television exactly what the Polish government is doing with the public television, because we also believe it was highly politicized. And this from the position not of a Pole, but somebody being in the European institutions. In my view, this is going to be the most difficult. And the second question is, you're quoting Professor Geremek saying peaceful revolution, but the difference with 1990s was that back then you have an old elite which wanted to keep power, but was ready to change values. Now you have a situation of a kind of the other side, which are not ready to change values. To what extent the certain level of radicalism that works in the 1990s, you believe is going to be enough to work now?
You hold that one, we'll take one more.
Yes.
Just a question about the professional pride of Polish lawyers. I had a little experience of Polish international lawyers in the last 2 decades of communist rule. I was quite struck that many of them were completely different from their Soviet colleagues and took a largely similar view of international law to that of the Western. Now, this may be academic international lawyers rather than holding official positions, even more official positions. But I'd be interested to know your opinion as to whether there was a degree, and only a degree, one mustn't say, for the professional pride emanating from that attitude. And I recall that one of the first, if not the first, foreign minister of Poland after the change in 1989 was himself, if I recall correctly, an international lawyer who presided quite happily over a pretty decisive change in Poland's allegiances from east to west.
Yes. Thank you for the questions. First, about the populism. Populism in your other countries. Unfortunately, I should say that we have a lot of challenges because of the dynamic situation in such states as Slovakia, but also probably in Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, why not France? Very close perspective with Madame Le Pen in Italy and perhaps in Spain. I don't know. It is very worrying. It is observed. In my view, probably it is the result of general disappointment of the European citizens. Because perhaps in the case of European citizens, European Union didn't give the adequate and correct answer for expectations, for ideas shared by European people. Perhaps the people now would like to, is my personal opinion, would like to have stronger participation in the European institution, in the process of decision taking in Europe, European institution. Until present, unfortunately, all reforms in the European Union toward to the strengthening the European institution didn't change the paysage, the landscape. But I'm convinced that we should probably to create the more friendly, more favorable, convincing narration about the modern Europe, and it is necessary to convince that for European citizens now is not the opposition between the European identity and national identity. In my opinion, it is absolutely complementary concept. European unity and diversity. Diversity, not only culture, diversity in various fields. We should convince the people that we can perfectly build the world, the European world, based on such a concept. The European institution seems to be, unfortunately, extremely formal, bureaucratic for average, ordinary citizen. It's not true, but it is awareness and probably such narration which is presented now is not convincing. I remain optimist about the future of Europe. I am convinced rather that the next European elections will be a clear sign for Central Democratic Party in Europe, and perhaps can fortify the position of democratic trends in European Union. But of course, we are not sure what will happen in next weeks. The war between Ukraine and Russia is one of the factors extremely important, and it is at the same time factor which divides the European society, but at the same time which ensure the greater solidarity. On one hand, we can see the enormous mobilization in France, now in Germany, but not necessarily in Central and Eastern Europe. It is very sad, but I can say that the populism is extremely strong also. The populism is not easy to be eliminated. This is something which is the kind of the expansions and the aggressive factor in our reality. And your question about the attitude, the opinion of the Polish international lawyers. It is interesting to say that for Polish professors of international law, the concept of the relation between national and international law was really different. I agree with such opinion. It's evolved during the time. Of course, if we read the first presentation of Mr. Skubiszewski at the beginning of the 1990s, the first Polish foreign affairs minister during the transformation process. It is completely different, like completely. It's different, strongly different, because rather the concept of the national sovereignty at the time was understood very conservative concept based on the clear division between national sovereignty and European sovereignty. The concept of the such divided sovereignty is, in my view, result of the development of European institutions, of the development of the European integration process. It is an effect of everything which happened in Europe during the last 20 years, and especially it is, one can say, important result of very powerful, strong activism of European Court of Justice. Of course, a lot of people can can argue that such activism of European Court of Justice is danger and could finally to limit national sovereignty and could perhaps cause greater disappointments and distance the nation being elements of EU. But I'm convinced that this European case law is perhaps the most. You can say, of course, that it's my opinion as the former judge of ECJ, but I can say it's my profound conviction that without the such very active, very functional case law of ECJ, European Union couldn't be exist. It wouldn't be possible. It was absolutely necessary condition for existence of EU, and for this reason, the concept of the international lawyers nowadays is different than at the beginning of the transformation process. We had a very well-known ambassador and the Polish professor, the president of the Brugge College, Professor KOŁAKOWSKI, as the Polish negotiator during the accession of the European Union. And if we compare even the presentation at the time delivered by the Polish expert, including the Professor KOŁAKOWSKI, perhaps it was a little different than presently, because this dynamic situation, this evolution is inevitable in the present time.
Thank you very much. We have about 20 minutes left. We have, I think, 6 or 7 questions to come. So if you could be concise both in questions and answers. Thank you very much. So I'm going to take them in 3. And if it is Jacek Zagadowski and then Andrew.
Okay, my name is Antony. I work for German television as the foreign correspondent here in the UK at the moment, and I used to be in Poland for quite a while. And I'm still regularly returning there. And I've just been there a few weeks ago. And what I was wondering, and where I would love to have your opinion on is, you refer not very extensively and comprehensively on the difficulties of repairing these institutions that have been mostly perverted, and that you cannot just change via an order of the executive, obviously. But at the same time, how big is the temptation for Tusk and the new government to just stop them with their own people now? And how aware are people of the dangers of doing that, of the necessity to safeguard these institutions and make them less vulnerable for a future attack of populism in the future? I mean, I had a long interview with Eva Wentowska on that, who you certainly know, who said, especially when it comes to television, it's good that they closed it down and put their own people in there for now. But this cannot be a long-term solution. There has to be proper public broadcasting, proper independent public broadcaster, and not just now a PO Tusk television. And that's something I think the temptation, because of all the traps and all the complications of doing is where Poland really could be a pioneer. They are quite high, I think. And how worried are you about this specific one?
Thank you very much.
Jacek Zagadowski, Digital Foundation. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about the social foundation for the law in Poland that you mentioned is so crucial for the sustainability of the institutions and the lack of constitutional awareness, for example, that you said as well, which allowed, for example, Colonel Morawiecki, Karl Schmidt to talk about the deciding on the exception and so on. But when talking about the restoring of the rule of law now, you haven't really mentioned what should be done about upgrading the social foundation of the law, the widespread understanding of the necessity of respecting the constitution and so on. And so what can be done in Poland to make this a common knowledge and a common value that needs to be respected across the political divide? Thank you very much.
Andrzej, you follow in the study subject. So my question, one comment about the elites and impact on the elites. I think it was interesting that this government attacked judges, but it's not also teachers. So there are a few groups, they have been defined as those to be on the kind of front of this revolution, anti-revolution, whatever we call it. It's interesting how you see this, because this was this intriguing why they choose a few groups and okay. But I have the questions about because I thought always this was a plan when they started. Did they know what they're going to do, or they did, you know, when they march, you know, and step by step they were kind of inviting the new ideas. It was a plan, and how much it was linked also to the experience from Hungary, because you mentioned Hungary, and so far Hungary regime is quite effective, you know, in kind of improving, you know, this system step by step, election by election.
Thank you, Mark.
The question, of course, as I said, it was planned. It was clear intention, in my view. It was clear intention of the PIS at the beginning process of transformation, the creation of this good change. Of course, the process was at the beginning rather slow. After that, faster and faster, but it was step by step, consequent process of building the authoritarian institution, because it's not accidental that the reforms introduced by the PIS related to all most fragile public areas. The education, the justice, the public media, everything was influenced by such processes. Of course, the model for such political concept for this how can I say, restoring the authoritarian system, because PIS would like, in my view, to restore the clear authoritarian system, was on the idea of Viktor Orban and his laboratory created in Hungary, how change how to form the institutions. Viktor Orban, of course, was in a better situation from his point of view, because he had a clear constitutional majority, which allowed him to change the constitution, to create a stronger constitutional system in favor of this authoritarian changes. In Poland, it was more complicated. Fortunately, it was more complicated. But it's my view. The first question concerning the vulnerability, the traps which are present in the Polish reality. Every step could be traps for those government. It's true, and I can say that I'm not able to deliver a clear, correct answer, exhaustive answer. What methods we should use to restore the democratic system? It is so complex, so complicated process that really, perhaps step by step. But if I share emotional opinion of my friends Wojtek Sadurski about the Constitutional Court, of course, it would be easier, perhaps more clear for public opinion, for construction of the constitutional awareness in Poland to resolve immediately the problem, and to eliminate all judges of Constitutional Court appointed by this PIS majority. But as you said, it would be extremely dangerous for Polish future strategy based on the concept, the construction, the rule of law, which should respect all standards, all requirements. The institution such constitutional courts probably will continue its activity in the future Poland also. But and if now we decide about so aggressive revolutionary steps, it will be really extremely, in my view, extremely risky for the future of the constitutional review in Poland, perhaps also for the future democracy in Poland. We should be extremely careful in our steps, which is necessary. But on the other hand, I repeat that we should, of course, use all possibilities which we have. We have a lot of possibilities, especially the judges who can apply directly the constitution and with such concept of the functional interpretation, it's powerful instrument. And another question related to social one can say social support. Is it possible to build such, to create such social support now? And what are the methods which could be used by the democratic elites in Poland to create such support? I can say that until present, in my view, this social support for democratic transformation, for restoring the rule of law, is relatively very strong. Paradoxically, after these years of PIS, the Polish society, paradoxically, is better prepared for new democratic changes. Now, because of this, I call this phenomena the awakened civil society. The Polish society better understands now what are the constitutional guarantees, what is the real importance of our integration in the European Union, what are finally important the independence of judicial system, because independence of judicial system was 5 years ago a completely abstract concept, completely abstract problem of legal elites. It wasn't a problem for ordinary citizens. Now it's completely different. And of course, what is necessary? It's necessary the good process of constitutional education, and at the level in the primary and secondary schools, we started with such formation of a young generation, and it is very spread, one can say, widespread in Polish society, such direct communication with ordinary people, the intellectual, the lawyers, the judges. It is completely different situation than at the beginning of the PIS power.
And we have T-shirts which say Constitucja.
Constitution. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was extremely important lessons. For society.
Very important.
Yes.
Final round, Elegativa, Paul, Betts, and then me. You.
Yes, thank you. And Garton, I'm a lecturer in European Union politics. I have two brief questions, a little bit more on the role and the impact of the European Union. in your opinion, which has been the most decisive and influential intervention on behalf of the EU? The debate is usually it's about sanctions and this is what matters, but it seems that the story you were saying is ultimately about the empowerment of judges in Poland. And the second question that I have is, was Poland a special case? I have been told that there was this perception that Poland is too big to fail, and it's one of the big, important, influential states that maybe now Slovakia doesn't really matter because it's too small, but the stakes were way too high.
Great question.
Thank you very much. You made a few historical references. You talked about Paul Schmidt, East Germany, you talked about the debates in the United States, the first half of the 19th century, federalism versus states' rights. So those are generally references about crisis, about the vulnerability of democracy. I mean, do you have more positive historical references? And we're thinking about the restoration of democracy. And I think you go back to the 1940s, you talk about France, West Germany, Italy, you also talk about Spain and Greece in the 1970s. In these debates, legal debates, when you talk about the importance of the restoration of liberal democracy, are there particular places or moments that people look to saying, we'd like to emulate that? I mean, so much as people like Ivan has talked about, the 1990s being age of imitation, is there also kind of an effort to emulate or imitate other historical models that have worked in terms of the restoration of democracy?
Final question, which in a way is asking you for a last word. Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust says, I am the power that always wills evil and does good. And do you think that historians might say of peace that it was a kind of Mephistophelian force, in a sense that the story you're telling us is both that it is awakened constitutional awareness, the will to defend the rule of law in Polish society, where it was very weak before, and in the European Union, has brought the European Union for the first time actually to define what it means by rule of law. I mean, I think it's fair to say when you joined the ECJ, it was extremely vague about what it meant by the rule of law and to assert its own constitutional sovereignty to defend it. So has peace been that structured?
Yes, very interesting observation, philosophical observation, of course. I'm convinced that finally, the result of the PIS political process, the constitutional awareness and constitutional values are better understood among the Poles and among European citizens. The problem of Polish democracy, the Polish collapse of judiciary system, this problem are very well known in Europe. About such issues as independence of judges, such questions have been debated in over of Europe in each member state as a good point of reference for everything. And one can say that of course, in such sense, one can say that the PIS played, in some sense, positive role as the factor which gave the impulse for strengthening the positive process among our society. This is one of the paradoxes. It wasn't intention. Wasn't intention of PIS. The PIS intention was clear, but the secondary effect, not necessarily wanted by PIS, was different, and we are, I repeat, better prepared for such type of crisis. In my view, to answer your question, the impact of this collapse of the rule of law in Poland is enormous for European Union, for all European unions. It wasn't the problem of Poland. It was the problem at the beginning. It was the problem of European Union symbol, because European Union, for the first time in its history, challenged such kind of the issues, such kind of democratic collapse, and now with these tools created by case law of EU, European Union is better prepared also, and it's not true that the case law of ECJ this recent years gave only some support Polish judges and Polish legal system. This support given for all member states, for all legal order, and it is visible. If we now would like to find some examples for such influence, even in analysis presented by ECJ case law, we can find the same criteria applied to in the Polish context, now applied to German judicial system. And for this reason, the ECJ sets clearly that the status of the procurator in German system is not sufficiently independent to use the European arrest warrant. For instance, there are another examples which could confirm, prove that the impact is very large, and probably one of them is now some trends among the European politicians toward to the strengthen the European mechanisms, strengthen the integration. It is perhaps the field of is for another debate, very complicated. And your question about the positive examples, whether such example exists. In my view, perhaps we have nowadays specific occasion to exercise something for the first time in the European history. Of course, you can say the Spain, the situation after the collapse of the communism in our part of Europe, the necessity to build institution of rule of law and democratic state generally in our countries. But it is incomparable, in my view. It's incomparable. The situation in 1989 is incomparable with the situation which exists in Poland. Because we have this institution which generally, in principle, should be respected, should be observed. We have the institution, we have constitutional court, which is necessary. We have the rule of law principle inscribed in the Polish constitution differently than in Polish constitution in 1989. In 1989, the Polish constitution didn't observe the concept of the division of power, the checks and balances mechanism. No. But now we should respect this mechanism. And for this reason, for the first time in the European history, in my view, perhaps it is my error, but for me, it is the first time in the European history we should confront such a kind of the challenges being the consequences of the collapse of rule of law in democratic environment. Because the PAS start its rules in democratic environment. In the state which all constitutional mechanism seems to be extremely effective. But nowadays, everything disappeared. And now we should confront the problem.
Thank you very much. And I think if the man looking down at us from behind, LESZEK KOŁAKOWSKI, had been listening to this lecture, he would have appreciated it very much, not only for the intellectual clarity and the richness of what you were telling us analytically, but also because, if I may say so, you're a great personification of the spirit of the Polish intelligentsia, with its moral concerns and its passion and its fighting spirit. And so for that too, please join me in thanking our people.
One word at the end of the conference, I would like to say that it is really a great honor to deliver the lecture, the LESZEK KOŁAKOWSKI lecture, because LESZEK KOŁAKOWSKI belongs to these personalities, Polish democratic personality, who are extremely appreciated by the Polish intelligentsia and Polish intellectual media, and it is a greater honor for me to participate in such event. Thank you very much.
Let's say, the first